The morning sun stretched across Willowbrook Park, bathing the green in soft golden light. Laughter from children bounced off the slide and swings, but something about this morning felt off. One corner of the park sat strangely still, wrapped in an uncomfortable hush. 5-year-old Jake tugged at his mother's hand, his bright blue eyes darting across the park with a mix of excitement and curiosity. "Mama," he whispered, pointing toward a knot of adults huddled near the old oak tree. "Why is everyone looking over them?" Sarah followed her son's gaze. Sure enough, a group of neighbors had gathered. Their faces were stiff with concern. Voices, raised just enough to carry, drifted toward him, sharp, judgmental tones that made her stomach twist. Something was happening. And it wasn't good. Jake's small fingers clutched tighter around his mother's hand as they took a few hesitant steps forward. The group of adults stood in a loose circle, backs turned to whatever had captured their attention. Sarah recognized Mrs. Henderson from 3 houses down, Mr. Peterson who bagged groceries at the local market, and a few others she'd seen around the neighborhood. "That thing is dangerous," Mrs. Henderson snapped, her voice slicing through the morning air. "Someone should call animal control before it hurts a child. Look at those scars." Another voice chimed in. "It's clearly been in fights. Probably a stray. These dogs are nothing but trouble." Jake's heart began to race. He couldn't see what they were talking about, only the angry faces and stiff arms pointing at something hidden behind the group. Then, he saw it. Just behind the crowd, pressed low against the base of the old oak tree, lay a golden retriever. He was big, much bigger than any dog Jake had ever seen up close. His coat, though once surely beautiful, was now filthy and matted, chunks of golden fur missing in places to reveal raw, scarred skin. One ear flopped at an odd angle, as if it had once been torn and never healed right. But it wasn't his size or his injuries that made Jake's chest hurt. It was his eyes. Cloudy and tired, they blinked slowly, once, twice, each time filled with a deep, soul-crushing sadness. The dog didn't move, didn't growl or bark. He lay completely still, his head low, as though he was trying to vanish into the grass. "Mama," Jake whispered. The doggy looked sad. Sarah knelt beside her son, brushing his hair gently. "Sweetheart, that dog might be hurt, or sick. It's best we stay away." But Jake couldn't look away. While the adults kept arguing about how dangerous the dog was, Jake watched his every movement. Or lack of movement. This wasn't a dog acting out or growling. He wasn't baring his teeth or barking. He was still. Silent. And scared. "Been here for 3 days, Mr. Peterson muttered. "Just lying there, staring at people. Makes everyone uncomfortable. My kids won't even play on this side of the park anymore. It's ruining everything," Mrs. Henderson added with a huff. Jake blinked back tears. The adults were talking about the dog like he wasn't even there. Like he couldn't hear them. But Jake could tell he could. The golden retriever's ears twitched every time someone raised their voice, every time a harsh word was spoken. And each time, the dog seemed to shrink a little further into himself. "Someone threw a stick at it yesterday," a teenage boy said quietly. Didn't even flinch. Sarah stiffened. Jake reached into his jacket pocket and felt the little pack of cheese crackers she had given him that morning. Without saying a word, he pulled it out and glanced at the dog again. "I want to give him my crackers," he said. "No, Jake," Sarah replied firmly. "We don't know anything about that dog. It could bite you." "But Mama," Jake said, "he's hungry. Look how skinny he is." Sarah followed his gaze. The golden retriever's ribs were visible even through the dirt and tangled fur. His breathing was shallow. But more than that, there was something in his expression. A kind of patient, heartbreaking resignation. Before Sarah could respond, Jake made up his mind. Without waiting for permission, He broke away from his mother's side and ran toward the oak tree. "Jake, no!" Sarah cried, her voice rising in panic. But he was already there. The golden retriever didn't flinch. He didn't growl. He just slowly lifted his head and looked up at the small boy standing before him. His eyes, even clouded with exhaustion and pain, softened. Up close, Jake could see it better. The sadness wasn't just in his body. It lived in his eyes, too, eyes that looked far too old for any dog. Eyes that had seen too much. Jake crouched down, opening the small trapper packet carefully. "Hi, doggy," he said softly. "Are you hungry?" The retriever blinked, head tilted just slightly. Jake held out one trapper, his hand small and trembling but steady. From behind them, Sarah watched, heart pounding. Every part of her wanted to rush forward and pull her son away. But something held her back. Then, the sound of footsteps crunching through the grass broke the moment. Mr. Peterson was coming toward them, face red with anger. "What do you think you're doing?" he barked at Jake. "That animal is dangerous. You could have been hurt." The retriever immediately lowered his head again, the brief flicker of hope gone in an instant. He shrank down so small, Sarah wondered how he was still breathing. Jake stepped in front of him, arms spread as if shielding the dog from the man. "He's not dangerous," Jake said quietly. "He's just sad." Mr. Peterson scoffed. "You don't know anything about dogs, kid." "Maybe not," Jake replied, his voice trembling. "But I know what it looks like when someone's been hurt too much." There was silence. No one expected that from a 5-year-old. Jake turned back to the retriever and gently placed the trapper on the ground. The dog lifted his head again, cautious and slow. He sniffed the trapper, then glanced at Jake. "Go ahead," Jake encouraged. "They're for you." The golden retriever edged forward, painfully slow. His paws trembled. But he moved. And when his tongue finally touched the trapper, his tail gave the tiniest wag. Jake's face lit up like the sun. Behind him, Sarah's breath caught in her throat. There was something special happening here, something bigger than just a boy and a stray dog. Sarah knelt a few feet away, watching Jake as he gently laid down a second trapper. The dog took another cautious bite, his cloudy eyes never leaving the little boy's face. It was like he was trying to figure something out, trying to understand why this small human was being kind when no one else had been. Jake reached into his pocket again. "I have more," he said softly. "You can have all of them if you want." Behind them, the adults were murmuring in disbelief, unsure whether to be more surprised that the dog hadn't lashed out, or that the boy hadn't run screaming. Even Mr. Peterson, whose jaw was still tight with disapproval, didn't move closer. He just stood there, fuming silently. "I'm going to name you Storm," Jake said with a smile. "Because your eyes look like clouds before it rains." The golden retriever paused mid-chew. His tail flicked again, this time more noticeable, a slow wag that caused a ripple through his frail body. His ears pricked a little, and for the first time, Sarah noticed a faint shimmer of something new in his expression. Recognition. Jake didn't notice. He was too busy carefully scattering the remaining trappers on the ground. "You don't have to be scared anymore," he whispered. "I'll protect you." Sarah finally stood, her instincts battling her logic. She wanted to yank Jake away from the animal, but part of her knew, deep down, that this wasn't some dangerous, violent stray. This was a dog who had been through something terrible. And somehow, her 5-year-old had seen right through the fear and filth. Storm, if that really was his name, finished the last of the trappers and inched forward, one paw at a time, until his nose brushed Jake's hand. He didn't lick or bite. He just rested his head gently against the boy's small fingers. Jake beamed. Then, from the side, a woman's voice called out, "Is that dog still here?" It was Mrs. Carter from the PTA. She walked over, arms crossed. I told you, someone needs to do something. What if it has rabies? Storm flinched, shrinking back toward the oak. Jake turned quickly, arms spread protectively again. He doesn't have rabies. He's nice. Mrs. Carter raised her eyebrows. You don't know that, sweetie. Jake stood taller. I do. He ate my crackers and didn't even bite me. He's just hungry and tired. The tension thickened again until Sarah finally stepped in. That's enough, she said gently, guiding Jake back a few steps. We don't need to scare him more than he already is. She crouched and looked her son in the eyes. Jake, I know you want to help him. I really do. But we don't know his story. He might belong to someone else, or he might be very sick. Jake nodded, reluctantly. Can we at least give him water? Before Sarah could answer, they were interrupted again. Animal control will be here by this afternoon, Mr. Peterson announced. I called them just now. They'll handle it. Jake's face fell. What does that mean? It means, Mr. Peterson said, that professionals will come and take the dog somewhere safe. Jake turned to his mother, eyes wide with fear. But what if they're not nice to him? What if they take him away forever? Sarah swallowed hard. She didn't know how to answer. Their town's animal control didn't exactly have a reputation for compassion, especially when it came to large, injured strays. Later that night, at home, Jake sat curled up on the couch, staring out the window at the moon. He hadn't said much during dinner. He just kept asking if they could go back to the park to check on Storm. Try to sleep, sweetheart, Sarah whispered, brushing his hair back as she tucked him in. Maybe things will be better in the morning. Jake didn't answer. The next morning, he was up and dressed before the sun had fully risen. Mama, he said urgently, we have to go see if Storm's still there. Sarah sighed, rubbing sleep from her eyes. Jake, I really think he's gone. Maybe someone picked him up. Maybe his owner found him. Jake just stared at her. Please, Mama. Just for a little bit. I want to see if he's okay. She hesitated, then finally nodded. All right. But just a quick visit. At the park, the usual weekend buzz was already building, kids playing, parents chatting, but Jake's eyes were locked on one spot, the old oak tree. And there he was. Storm. Still lying there. Still alone. Jake ran ahead, this time carrying a small bag with some leftover sandwich and crackers Sarah had let him pack himself. Storm lifted his head as Jake approached, and this time, his tail thumped weakly against the grass. He remembered him. Sarah knelt down nearby, close enough to intervene if needed, but far enough to give them space. Jake opened the bag and laid out the food like he was preparing a picnic for two. I brought you some of my sandwich too, he said. It's turkey and cheese. I don't like the crusts, but you can have them. Storm sniffed the food, then looked up at Jake. He didn't move right away. It was like he was waiting, asking permission. Jake nodded. It's all for you. The retriever moved forward again, his steps a little less shaky this time. As he ate, Jake reached out, tentatively stroking the side of his head. Storm leaned into the touch, eyes closing for a moment. Storm, Jake said again, his voice calm and sure. The dog's ears twitched. Storm? Sarah said aloud, confused. Why that name? Jake shrugged. I don't know. It just feels right. But the moment was interrupted again, this time by the sound of footsteps. Heavy, rushed, and angry. Mr. Peterson. He stormed across the grass toward them. What are you doing now? He barked. I told you this animal is dangerous. Storm immediately lowered his head again, his fragile moment of peace shattered. Jake stood quickly, arms out. Stop yelling. You're scaring him. Mr. Peterson pointed at the dog. That thing needs to be removed. Animal control will be here any minute. You're interfering, and you're putting yourself at risk. Jake's lip quivered. He's not dangerous. He's scared. You're the one being mean. Sarah stepped between them, her voice low and tight. Enough, Greg. He's a child, and that dog hasn't done anything to hurt anyone. He doesn't belong here, Peterson snapped. You know that. Jake bent down and whispered to Storm, don't worry. I'll keep you safe. The dog didn't move, but his eyes met Jake's again, and that flicker of recognition returned. Storm, Jake said once more. And that's when it happened. The dog lifted his head and wagged his tail. This time, not weakly. Not with hesitation. It was real. Thump. Sarah blinked. Did he just react to that name? Jake nodded. He knows it. That's his name. Sarah looked between her son and the dog, then up at the sky. Something was changing. Something was beginning. The sunlight filtered through the oak branches, dappled across Storm's back as he lay close to Jake, his breathing a little more steady than the day before. That name, Storm, seemed to unlock something deep within him. Each time Jake said it, Storm's ears perked just a little higher, his tail moved just a bit more, and that old heaviness in his eyes seemed to lift, even if just for a moment. Jake sat cross-legged on the grass, offering Storm what remained of his sandwich crusts. You're getting stronger, he said with a proud smile. See? Told you things would get better. Sarah stood a few feet back, watching them with a mix of awe and caution. She could hardly believe this was the same dog everyone had been so afraid of yesterday. The dog people had been ready to throw away. But just as peace was starting to settle over the scene, the voices came. First one. Then two. Then more. The crowd from the day before was returning, neighbors, parents, people walking their dogs or pushing strollers. Word had spread that the stray was still there, and that the little boy had gone back to feed it. What's the child doing now? Why hasn't animal control come yet? This is unsafe. Absolutely unsafe. Sarah turned to see Mr. Peterson speaking with an officer, one of the two animal control workers who had arrived moments earlier, holding long poles with loops at the end. Jake sensed the shift too. He looked up and saw the two uniformed men standing just beyond the tree line. Mama, he whispered, his face suddenly pale. They're here for him. Storm lifted his head and sniffed the air. Then he saw the men, and he knew. His body stiffened. His tail stopped wagging. And then, for the first time, he let out a low, trembling growl. Storm, it's okay, Jake said quickly, placing a hand on the dog's shoulder. They're not gonna hurt you. I won't let them. But the animal control officers weren't listening. Their eyes were locked on Storm. One of them reached for the pole, slowly stepping forward. Man, you need to get your son away from the dog, one of the officers said to Sarah, his tone curt. We need to do our job. Jake stood, planting himself directly in front of Storm, his arms outstretched like a tiny human shield. No, he cried. You can't take him. He's not bad. The officer took another step. We've dealt with dogs like this before, kid. Big strays. Covered in scars. Could be unpredictable. He needs to be examined and secured. But he's not like that. Jake shouted, tears forming in his eyes. He's gentle. He didn't even growl until he saw your pulls. Storm stayed behind Jake, trembling violently now, his brow low and sad, more fear than anger. From behind, Mr. Peterson chimed in triumphantly, see? I told you it was dangerous. Look at it baring its teeth. He's not baring his teeth at us. Jake snapped. He's scared of you. Sarah moved fast, stepping between her son and the officers. "Wait," she said, holding up a hand. "Can we just slow down? Look at him. He hasn't hurt anyone. My son has been feeding and petting him. He hasn't even barked at another person until just now." The younger officer hesitated, glancing down at the dog. "He's still a risk, ma'am. He's a living soul," Sarah said. "Not a threat. He needs help, not fear." Before they could continue, a new voice rang out from behind the crowd. "Storm?" Everyone turned. A tall, older man was jogging toward them, his gray coat flapping behind him. His face was deeply glowing, and he moved with a limp, but his eyes were wild with recognition. Storm's head snapped toward the boys. His entire body lifted, ears straight up, tail frozen mid-wag. "Storm," the man called again, slowing to a walk as he drew closer. Then, suddenly, Storm pushed himself up. He stumbled, legs stiff and sore, but he moved. The dog, who had barely lifted his head for days, now took real steps, limping but determined, toward the man. And then he whimpered. Loud. Desperate. A sound that was half cry, half joy. "Shadow," the man whispered as the golden retriever collapsed against his legs, burying his face in the man's coat, tail now wagging with every ounce of energy left in his frail body. The park fell silent. The angry voices. The shouts. Even the officers. No one said a word. The man dropped to his knees, arms wrapped around the dog's neck. "Oh my boy," he murmured through tears. "What did they do to you?" "I've been looking everywhere." Jake stared in amazement. Sarah placed a hand over her mouth. Storm, no, Shadow, wasn't a stray at all. He had a person. He had a past. And now, he had been found. The older man stood slowly, still holding onto the dog. "His name's not Storm. It's Shadow. He's not dangerous. He's never been dangerous. He's a hero." Sarah blinked. "What do you mean?" "My name is Thomas," the man said softly. "I'm a retired officer. Shadow was my partner. 8-9. We worked narcotics and missing persons for over 7 years together." Murmurs rose in the crowd. Thomas continued, voice thick with emotion. "There was an operation. Things went bad. I got injured. There was chaos. Shadow disappeared. Everyone thought, maybe he didn't make it. But he did," Jake whispered. Thomas nodded. "He always found his way home. Eventually." Jake looked at the dog, at Shadow, with wonder. And Shadow looked back, his cloudy eyes filled with something new, peace. If Jake hadn't stepped in, if he hadn't been kind, this reunion might never have happened. The crowd that had once been a wall of judgment now stood quietly, faces softened with awe. Mr. Peterson was speechless, his mouth slightly agape, as the gentle golden retriever leaned into his owner's legs like a child returning to the safety of home. Shadow, once Storm, now known truly, looked between Jake and Thomas with a quiet gratitude. His tail, once too weak to move, wagged in wide, proud arcs. Jake wiped the tears from his cheeks, trying to hold back a smile. "I told you he wasn't bad," he whispered. Thomas looked down at Jake and then at Sarah. "This boy, he's the reason I found him, isn't he?" Sarah nodded, still visibly emotional. "He wouldn't stop talking about the dog. Even when I told him it was probably gone. He made us come back." Jake stepped forward, his hands out, palms open. "I didn't do much. I just fed him and talked to him. And called him Storm." Thomas chuckled through his tears. "Close enough." The animal control officers lowered their pools and took a step back. "We'll close the case," one of them said. "No need for our services anymore." Thomas gently stroked the top of Shadow's head, his hands trembling. I never thought I'd see him again. I thought, after everything. Sarah helped Jake take a step back, giving the pair some space. But Jake lingered close, unwilling to leave his friend. He remembered me, Jake said proudly. He came to me. Thomas nodded. Because you were the first person who didn't treat him like a monster. Mr. Peterson, finally regaining his voice, muttered, you should have said he was a police dog. Thomas looked up. Would that have changed how you treated him? Peterson didn't answer. He just turned and walked away. The rest of the neighbors slowly began to disperse as well, leaving behind only the small group that mattered now: Thomas, Jake, Sarah, and Shadow. But the story wasn't over yet. As the excitement faded and the park began to quiet again, a new problem surfaced. What happens now? Sarah asked, brushing a lock of hair from Jake's face. Will you take him home with you? Thomas hesitated, his eyes suddenly clouded with concern. That's complicated. Why? Jake asked quickly. You're his person. I am, Thomas said. But Shadow isn't just a dog. And I'm not just his owner. We were part of something big. Something dangerous. I don't think the people who lost him are done looking for him. Sarah tensed. Are you saying someone's still after him? Thomas nodded. He was part of an elite K-9 unit, used in specialized drug and trafficking operations. He knows things. He remembers faces. They don't want that getting out. Jake's eyes widened. So he's in danger? And anyone with him might be too, Thomas admitted. That's why I left town. To keep people safe. Sarah's voice dropped. But now you're back. And they might be watching. Jake looked at Shadow, whose tail had stopped wagging again, his ears twitching like he knew exactly what they were talking about. No, Jake said firmly. We can't let the bad people find him. We have to hide him. Thomas smiled weakly. Easier said than done, little man. But what if he stayed with us? Jake offered. He can live at our house. Mama and I can keep him safe. And you can visit. Sarah blinked. Jake. Jake turned to her, eyes wide. Please, Mama. Just for a while. Until the danger goes away. Thomas shook his head slowly. It's not that simple. He needs medical care. Special food. And security. He's a police dog, Jake, not just a pet. But what if he was both? Jake said. What if he could be a pet and a police dog? Like a partner. Like you were. Thomas was quiet, then knelt down beside Jake. You really care about him, don't you? Jake nodded quickly. He's my best friend. Sarah put a hand on Thomas's shoulder. Maybe we can find a way. A plan. A safe one. Thomas looked into Shadow's eyes, still loyal and steady, then at the small boy who had somehow pulled this broken animal back from the edge. All right, Thomas said finally. But there have to be rules. Jake leaned in, barely breathing. Shadow can stay with you, Thomas continued, but I'll be visiting daily. We'll build a routine, walks, vet care, protection plans. And if anything happens, anything at all, we make decisions together. Jake threw his arms around his mom's waist. Yes. Yes. Thank you, Mama. Sarah smiled through tears. Just remember, this is a big responsibility. Jake turned to Shadow and grinned. Did you hear that, boy? You're coming home with us. The golden retriever's tail wagged so fiercely that dust puffed into the air around them. It was like he knew. That night, Shadow curled up on a soft blanket by the living room couch, finally inside a warm home after what must have felt like an eternity. Jake sat beside him, stroking his ears, reading aloud from his favorite storybook. Sarah cleaned up the remains of dinner in the kitchen, watching them quietly. Outside, the wind picked up. The street was quiet. Too quiet. And then Shadow sat up suddenly, ears alert. Jake looked up. "What is it, boy?" The dog let out a low, rumbling sound, not quite a growl, but not friendly either. He stood, slowly but deliberately, and walked toward the front window. Outside, a black sedan sat across the street. Not moving. Just watching. Jake followed Shadow to the window, placing a hand on his back. "That's the same car from the park," he whispered. Shadow didn't bark. He just stared. And Sarah, drying her hands with a dish towel, froze in place. She'd seen that car too. More than once now. "Shadow," Jake whispered, "do they know you're here?" The golden retriever remained still, every muscle tense, his body like a coiled spring. Thomas's warning echoed in Sarah's moaning. "They're still looking for him." The black sedan didn't move for hours. It just sat there, silent, patient, ominous. Like it belonged to someone who had all the time in the world. Sarah tried to shake the unease that crawled up her spine as she pulled the curtains shut. She didn't want to alarm Jake, but Shadow's reaction made it clear this wasn't just paranoia. He remembered that car. He remembered whoever was inside. That night, after tucking Jake into bed, Sarah called Thomas. "They found him, haven't they?" she asked, her voice low. Thomas didn't hesitate. "I was afraid of that." "So what do we do now?" "We stay calm," he said. "We don't run. That'll make things worse. But we do need to talk, face to face." 10 minutes later, Thomas arrived, letting himself in with the spare key Sarah had given him earlier that day. He went straight to Shadow, kneeling beside the dog who was still posted near the window, his eyes sharp, alert. Thomas placed a hand on his neck. "You saw them, didn't you, boy?" Shadow didn't move, but his body trembled. "I think whoever paid to have Shadow disappear," Thomas said, "has realized he's alive." Sarah folded her arms tightly. "Are you saying someone bought him? Like, to get rid of him?" Thomas nodded grimly. "In the criminal underworld, trained K-9 units are a threat. Shadow wasn't just any police dog, he was part of a unit that took down some major operations. People went to prison because of him. High-ranking people." He stood and began to pace. "I was told Shadow died in that last mission, but I never saw a body. And I never believed it. He's too smart to get caught off guard. I think someone captured him. Tried to break him. And when that didn't work, they dumped him," Sarah finished, horrified. "Like trash." Jake, who had tiptoed to the top of the stairs and overheard everything, finally spoke. "They didn't win, though. Shadow came back." Thomas turned, surprised. "Jake, did you hear all that?" The boy nodded. "And I'm not scared. Not even a little. Because Shadow's with me now." Thomas exchanged a glance with Sarah. "We'll have to keep a close watch. No routines. No walks at the same time every day. No talking to strangers about him." Jake nodded solemnly. Sarah hesitated before asking, "Why didn't you tell us everything from the beginning?" Thomas sighed. "Because I didn't want to bring that world into your home. Shadow's past is dangerous, and I didn't want it touching Jake. But now, it's already here." He looked back at Shadow, who was still posted by the window, unmoving. "They know he's alive. And they won't stop." The next morning, Sarah stayed home from work. Jake didn't go to school. They spent the day together, creating distractions, making pancakes, building pillow forts, watching cartoons with the volume turned up too loud. But every so often, Jake would glance out the window, and Sarah knew his heart wasn't entirely in it. He was waiting for trouble. Shadow followed Jake everywhere now. Like a shadow, truly. Every step, every room, every moment. When Jake went to the bathroom, Shadow waited outside the door. When Jake played with his toys, Shadow laid down at his feet. It was as if the dog had decided, this boy saved me. Now I'll protect him forever. Late in the afternoon, Thomas returned with a plan. I've been working with a few contacts, he said. Old friends from the force. People I trust. We're going to create a safe perimeter around your house. Cameras, sensors, backup, and officers on rotation. Jake's eyes lit up. Like secret agents? Thomas smiled. Kind of. Just less movie style, more real-world safety. But why not just catch the bad guys now? Jake asked. They're sitting in a tower right across the street. Because the people in that tower? Thomas said. They're not the ones pulling the strings. They're watching. Waiting. The real threats don't show their faces until they have to. Sarah shivered. Jake stood tall. Then we'll wait too. And when they come for Shadow, we'll stop them. Thomas looked at the boy with something like admiration. You're braver than most grown-ups I know. That night, the sedan was gone. For a moment, Sarah thought maybe the danger had passed. But Shadow didn't relax. Not even for a minute. 3 days later, it returned. Same car. Different time. This time, parked in Sarah's driveway. Shadow erupted into action, ears forward, chest low, tail stiff. He moved like he had when he was working, fully alert, fully ready. Jake saw it first. Mama. They're back. Sarah ran to the window. A man had stepped out of the car. Tall, dark jacket, baseball cap pulled low. He wasn't carrying anything, just standing there, staring at the house like he owned it. Then he turned and walked toward the back. Sarah grabbed her phone and dialed 911. I need police at 425 Maple Street immediately, she said. There's an unknown man in my driveway, and my dog is alerting to danger. The dispatcher asked if it might just be a delivery person. No, Sarah said firmly, our dog is trained. And he's not reacting to a delivery man. Outside, Shadow growled, a sound so low and deep it made the windows vibrate. Jake placed a hand on his side. Easy, boy. We've got this. They heard the back gate creak. A scratching at the door. Then silence. Sarah's heart pounded. Shadow stood completely still, his eyes locked on the back door. The silence broke with a sudden bark, sharp, commanding, unstoppable. Within moments, sirens. Flashing lights. Officers sweeping the yard. But the intruder was gone. They'd vanished into the neighborhood like smoke. But they had left something behind. A GPS tracker, stuck under Sarah's tongue. A note, crumpled by the back door. One word, printed in block letters, surrender. The police stayed long after the sirens faded. Officers swept the backyard for prints, analyzed the GPS tracker, and secured the perimeter. But the man in the dark jacket had disappeared without a trace. Sarah watched the officers pack up their gear with a growing pit in her stomach. They're getting bolder, Thomas said quietly. He held the crumpled note in a gloved hand, reading it again. Surrender. That's not a warning, it's a threat. Jake stood next to Shadow, arms crossed, brow furrowed like a soldier preparing for war. They're not getting him, he said, eyes full of fire. They can't have him. Thomas looked at the boy and then back at the note. They know exactly where Shadow is now. They've tracked him. Probably trapped you, too. Why? Sarah asked, finally saying what had been gnawing at him. Why are they still after him? What's so important about this dog? Thomas sat down heavily in the living room armchair and leaned forward. For a moment, he said nothing. Then he looked at Sarah and Jake and said, I think it's time you knew the whole story. Jake slid onto the couch beside Shadow, who was resting his head in the boy's lap. The dog's tail thumped lightly against the cushions. Shadow wasn't just a K-9, Thomas began. He was part of a highly classified narcotics and trafficking task force, a special unit embedded with federal agents. We didn't just chase down drug runners or do routine patrols. We were trained to infiltrate cartel operations, identify smuggling patterns, and uncover networks that spanned countries. Jake's mouth dropped open. So, he was like a spy. In a way, yes, Thomas nodded. He was trained not just to track, sense, or apprehend suspects, but to detect hidden compartments, illegal currency, and even microchips. Shadow could sniff out more than just danger. He could find secrets. Sarah looked stunned. And these people, whoever they are, they want him gone because he knows too much? Yes, Thomas said. Because during one of our last missions, Shadow found something he wasn't supposed to. We were investigating a compound just outside the city limits. Everyone thought it was just another stash house, but Shadow picked up something odd. He paused. What? Jake asked. A hidden room, Thomas said. Behind a thick wall in the basement. Inside, there were documents. Ledgers. Names. And something worse. He swallowed hard. Children, he said softly. Trafficked. Held for ransom. Sold. Some of them just disappeared. Sarah gasped. Jake looked horrified. Shadow's alert gave us enough time to bring in backup and rescue several of them. But whoever was behind it disappeared. And after that, everything went dark. They knew Shadow had been there. They knew he was the one who found the evidence. He looked down at the golden retriever now sleeping beside Jake, body curled tight but peaceful. They must have caught him during our final operation. While I was injured. I never saw it happen. But I think they tried to break him, maybe retrain him or make him disappear. And when they couldn't, they dumped him. Jake whispered, that's why he was so sad. Thomas nodded. He remembered everything. But he was lost. And broken. But not anymore, Jake said fiercely. Now he's found. Thomas leaned forward and placed a hand on Jake's shoulder. Because of you. Over the next few days, life became a quiet version of normal, but with layers of caution sewn into every routine. Jake stopped going to school in person. A tutor came instead. Sarah rearranged her work schedule to be home more often. Thomas, with help from the local police department, installed hidden cameras around the property and even reinforced the locks and windows. And Shadow, he was changing. He was stronger now. His coat was still patchy, but the gleam was returning. His steps were still stiff, but there was purpose in his stride. And every morning, he conducted what Thomas called the perimeter check, walking slowly around the backyard, nose twitching, ears perked, just as he had done back when he was active. Jake had become his assistant. Dressed in his superhero pajamas, he followed Shadow from one fence post to another, pointing out anything he found suspicious. It was a ding, but it was also something more. It was preparation. One afternoon, while Shadow and Jake were lying in the grass watching the clouds, Sarah came outside holding a folder. Jake, honey, Detective Rodriguez just dropped this off. He wants us to look at some photos. Jake sat up. Photos of what? He said it might help, Sarah said, kneeling beside him. They think someone in the neighborhood might be working with the people following Shadow. Someone who's been helping them trap him. Thomas joined them, taking the folder and flipping through the first few pages. His face went pale. This one, he said quickly, tapping a picture. That's him. The guy from the compound. He was there that day. Jake leaned over to look. The man in the photo had a long scar across his temple and cold, narrowed eyes. I saw him near the school, Jake said suddenly. I remember. He was just standing there, watching. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. Thomas closed the folder. That settles it. We're escalating this. Escalating how? Sarah asked. We're going to smoke them out. That night, the plan was put into motion. Unmarked police cars were stationed at both ends of the street. Officers dressed in plain clothes walked dogs, pushed strollers, played normal residents. A few neighbors were even recruited to help. Sarah was nervous. Jake could barely sleep. Shadow paced the house all night, his instincts fully awake. And just before dawn, it happened. A different car this time, gray SUV. Tinted windows. No license plates. It pulled into the same driveway the black sedan had used before. The man from the photo stepped out. And this time, he wasn't alone. Two others followed, one carrying a black case, the other holding a long object under a tarp. Thomas watched from the kitchen window and gave the signal. Jake stood beside Shadow, hand resting gently on his back. The dog was trembling again, not from fear this time, but from something deeper. Readiness. The officers moved in. Lights flashed. Voices shouted. Police. Down on the ground. The man with the case turned to run, but he was intercepted. Shadow lunged forward, barking with a fury none of them had heard before. The intruders froze. It was over in seconds. Later, after the suspects had been taken into custody, Detective Rodriguez gathered the family and Thomas in the living room. They weren't just here to capture Shadow, he said. They were here to kill him. Sarah gasped. They were carrying a high-dose tranquilizer. Not for capture, meant to make it look like he passed peacefully in his sleep. No pain. No noise. Just gone. Jake hugged Shadow tighter. But we stopped them, Thomas said. You stopped them. Rodriguez nodded. Thanks to Shadow's training. And your boy's courage. Jake looked at Shadow and whispered, I'll never let anything happen to you. Ever. And for the first time since arriving in their home, Shadow laid his head on Jake's lap, not just to rest, but because he finally knew he was safe. For the next few weeks, life toned, at least on the surface. The failed attempt to abduct or silence Shadow had rattled the small community. The local news picked up the story, carefully sanitized by law enforcement. Most of the town only heard about a break-in and the heroic dog who helped catch the culprits. The deeper truth remained hidden, as it had to be. But for Jake, Sarah, and Thomas, life was now a balancing act between trying to feel normal and staying constantly alert. Shadow, stronger than ever, still walked the perimeter every morning. His coat was growing back, his muscles filling in. Though his face remained marked by scars and cloudy eyes, there was a light in them now. Trust. Peace. Even joy. But peace wouldn't last long. It began with a storm. Thunder rumbled across the hills, and rain lashed at the windows. Sarah had gone to check on Mrs. Chen, the elderly woman who lived 2 houses down and had lost power earlier that evening. Jake and Shadow were curled up together on the living room couch. The boy was reading a storybook, his voice soft, the golden retriever's head resting on his lap. Suddenly, a sound broke through the noise of the storm. Glass. Breaking. Jake froze. Shadow lifted his head immediately, ears forward, body tense. Another crash. This time, from the kitchen. Jake's heart pounded in his chest. Shadow, he whispered. The dog moved quickly but silently, positioning himself between Jake and the noise. Then came footsteps, wet and heavy, squelching against the hardwood floor. Jake scrambled behind the couch. A man in dark, soaked clothing stepped into the room, water dripping from his coat, his face half covered with a scarf. "Just give me the dog," he growled. "You don't know what he's done." Shadow stood thin, body blocking Jake, growling low and deep. "Not just a warning, a promise. Don't hurt him." Jake tried. "Please don't." The intruder ignored him and reached into his coat. Shadow erupted. The golden retriever launched himself forward with a powerful bark, driving the man backward and slamming him into the wall. They struggled, man against beast, but Shadow's training kicked in. He wasn't attacking to injure. He was defending to disable. The man grabbed a broken lamp and swung it at Shadow, hitting him hard on the side. Shadow yelped but didn't back down. From behind the couch, Jake screamed, "Leave him alone." And then, sirens. Again. Red and blue lights painted the stone-drenched walls as police flooded into the house. The man tried to flee but didn't make it past the porch. Shadow limped back toward Jake, blood trickling from his side. But his eyes, cloudy as heaven, were locked on the boy, checking to see if he was okay. "I'm fine," Jake whispered, hugging him tightly. "You're the best dog in the world." Later, after the paramedics had checked them both and the officers had secured the scene, Thomas arrived, drenched from the rain. Sarah returned home moments later, her umbrella flipping backward from the wind. "What happened?" she cried, rushing to Jake and Shadow. "Are you okay?" Jake nodded. "Shadow saved me again." The paramedic knelt beside Shadow. "He's banged up, but nothing critical. Some bruising, maybe a cracked rib. We'll get him checked out." Thomas rubbed his temples. They came back. Even after all that, they still want him. Detective Rodriguez stepped in from the kitchen. "We just got confirmation. The man who broke in tonight, ex-military, hired muscle. We traced his phone. He was in contact with someone listed only as N." Thomas stiffened. "N?" Rodriguez nodded. "We think it's short for Maria, a name that's shown up in several black market K-9 dealings. Rumors say she used to train elite police dogs before she went rogue. Now, she collects them." "Collects them?" Sarah asked. "As weapons," he explained. "She sells trained K9s to cartels, private armies, foreign buyers." Shadow wasn't just a risk to her. He was a lost asset. One that escaped. Jake was shaking. "She's not going to stop, is she?" "No," Rodriguez said. "Not until she gets him back or takes him out." A few days later, after Shadow had been patched up and the storm clouds had moved on, Jake and Thomas sat on the back porch watching the sunrise. The air smelled of wet grass and hope. Jake held Shadow's head in his lap, stroking his ears slowly. "I don't want him to go away," Jake whispered. "Even if it keeps him safe." Thomas placed a hand on Jake's shoulder. "Neither do I." "I've been thinking," Jake said, looking out at the yard. "You said Shadow was your partner, right?" Thomas nodded. "Best one I ever had." "Well, maybe he can have two partners now." Thomas raised an eyebrow. "Two?" "Me and you," Jake said. "We can share. Like divorced parents." Thomas laughed, soft, tired, grateful. "Shadow would like that." Jake leaned down and whispered into Shadow's fur. "What do you think, boy? Want to live with us but work with Mr. Thomas again too?" The golden retriever looked up, his eyes worn, tail thumping lightly. His answer was clear. The following week, with the help of the police department and Thomas's old unit, Shadow was officially reinstated, not as a standard K-9 officer, but as a community dog, partnered with both Thomas and Jake. Together, They began visiting schools, attending neighborhood events, and showing children that scars didn't mean something was broken. Shadow wasn't just protecting anymore. He was healing others and himself. But somewhere far away, across a border in a dark room filled with screens and monitors, a woman in a gray coat watched the footage of Shadow's return with narrowed eyes. She turned to the man beside her. "He's alive," she said. "And worse, he's happy." The man said nothing. She tapped a single key on her laptop. "Deploy Unit 2. The summer air in Willowbrook was warm and buzzing with life, but the Patterson household was anything but calm. Despite the quiet on the outside, community barbecues, kids on bikes, and flowers blooming in every front yard, an invisible pressure hung over the house like fog. Everyone was waiting. Watching. Even Shadow, who had regained his strength, was restless. His tail wagged, his nose twitched, but his eyes, those cloudy, ever-watchful eyes, were always spinning. And then it happened again. The tongue. A black SUV this time, different plates, different model. But the same slow roll. The same way it paused across the street just a moment too long. Shadow growled before the tower even came into full view. "They're back," Jake whispered, standing beside the window. Sarah called the police immediately, but by the time they arrived, the tower was gone. This time, there was no note. No broken window. Just a message, scratched into the side of the house with something sharp. "You can't hide him forever." Sarah's knees buckled when she saw it. Thomas, who arrived 10 minutes later, took one look and said, "That's it. We're not waiting anymore. We need to disappear." Jake blinked. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Thomas said grimly, "we're going off the grid." That night, as officers quietly installed more cameras and reinforced the house, Thomas pulled Jake aside with a flashlight and a map. "You remember the tree house I told you about?" he asked. "The one in Miller's Woods?" Jake nodded. "It's still there. Old, but solid. It was used as a ranger outpost a long time ago. There's a small storage cabin nearby with supplies. If we go there, no one will find us." Jake's heart beat faster, not from fear, but excitement. "Can Shadow come?" Thomas smiled. "Shadow goes wherever you go." They made a plan. Early morning. No electronics. One backpack each. Shadow would walk, not ride, less noise, fewer tracks. Sarah hesitated, but finally agreed. If it meant keeping Jake and Shadow safe, she'd follow them to the ends of the earth. The hike into Miller's Woods was long and slow. The trail had overgrown in places, and the summer heat made it feel heavier than it was. But Shadow led the way with surprising energy. He sniffed, scanned, even doubled back at times to make sure no one was following. Jake followed closely behind, his backpack bouncing with every step, filled mostly with crappers, a flashlight, and one of his favorite picture books. Sarah carried the essentials, water, first aid kit, and a walkie-talkie. Thomas kept lookout. After 2 hours, they found it. The tree house. Half hidden in a grove of oaks, the old wooden structure was surprisingly sturdy. Someone had clearly used it recently. There were clean blankets folded in the corner, a few old food cans, and even a small lantern. Jake looked around and wondered. This is perfect. Shadow immediately circled the inside of the space, his nose working overtime. Once satisfied, he laid down in front of the only entrance, his post. We'll stay here tonight, Thomas said. And maybe longer, if we have to. Back at the house, things weren't so quiet. Detective Rodriguez had received word from a federal contact, new movement on a known mercenary unit connected to Maria, the rogue K-9 handler. They had just crossed into the state. This wasn't over. Not even close. That night, in the treehouse, Jake and Shadow curled up side by side, watching the stars through the slats in the ceiling. Do you think they'll find us? Jake asked. Shadow didn't answer, of course. But he lifted his head and looked out the window with eyes sharp and alert. Jake smiled. I didn't think so. Then he whispered, you're not just my dog anymore. You're my best friend. Shadow's tail thumped once. Jake reached into his backpack and pulled out the picture book. Want me to read? The dog shifted closer, as if in answer. And under the quiet rustle of trees and distant owl calls, Jake read aloud until he drifted to sleep, his hand resting on Shadow's fur. They woke to silence. Too much silence. Shadow was already on his feet, body stiff, head low. Thomas was outside, checking traps when he saw it. Footprints. Heavy boots. More than one set. Coming toward the treehouse. He ran back. They're here. Sarah's eyes widened. How did they find us? No time, Thomas said. We barricade. Now. Jake stood up bravely. I'll help. No, Jake, Sarah said quickly. Stay with Shadow. I'm not leaving him, Jake said. He's not leaving me. Shadow stood beside him, growling low, not in fear but in warning. Thomas peeked out from the treehouse window. Two men were approaching, slowly, carefully. They weren't shouting. They weren't calling out. They were hunting. One of them held a long pole. A tapped pole. The other had a black bag slung over his shoulder. Sarah's breath caught. They're here for him. Thomas looked at Jake. You remember the escape hatch I showed you? Under the floor? Jake nodded. Take Shadow. Go now. But. No buts. Go. Now. Sarah hugged Jake tight and kissed his forehead. I'll be right behind you. Jake opened the hatch. The small tunnel led to a slope that would take them down into the lower grove where thick brush made it impossible to track by sight. Shadow hesitated, his instincts screaming to protect, not run. Jake whispered, please, boy. Just come with me. The dog finally followed. The hatch closed behind them just as the first boot landed on the treehouse steps. The next 20 minutes were chaos. Voices. Shouting. Then silence. Sarah and Thomas held their breath, hiding in the corner as one of the mercenaries entered and began scanning with a flashlight. Don, he muttered. The second man stepped inside. Check below. He dropped to his knees, searching the floor. But Thomas had reset the hatch, covered it in branches and dust. The man cursed. They knew we were coming. The thirst replied, Maria's not gonna like this. Should we keep looking? Yeah. They're on foot. Can't be thong. And then, they were gone. An hour later, in the lower grove, Jake and Shadow waited behind a fallen log, hidden under a tangle of leaves and branches. Jake was shaking. Shadow stayed pressed against him, still and silent. Finally, they heard the signal. 3 short whistles. Thomas. Jake stood and emerged from the underbrush, Shadow right behind him. Thomas was waiting at the edge of the trail, smiling. You did good, partner. Jake ran into his arms. I didn't leave him. Thomas ruffled his hand. I knew you wouldn't. Back in the safety of a nearby ranger outpost, abandoned but still structurally sound, Sarah, Jake, Thomas, and Shadow took shelter while the police combed Miller's woods for the 2 intruders. Detective Rodriguez had already arrived at the edge of the forest, coordinating with state troopers and canine units. It was no longer a local case. The reach of Maria's network had stretched too far, too deep. She's not just after a dog, Rodriguez said, turning toward Thomas and Sarah. She's trying to erase a piece of evidence that could bring her entire operation down. And she almost did, Thomas replied grimly. But not anymore. Jake sat in the corner of the outpost cabin with Shadow curled against him. The golden retriever was exhausted, eyes closed, breath even, but his ears would twitch at every new sound. He was still listening. Still protecting. Can we stay here forever? Jake asked softly. Sarah knelt beside him and ran a hand through his hair. Maybe not forever, sweetheart. But until it's safe. Jake looked up. What if it's never safe again? Thomas approached them both and knelt in front of the boy. Then we stopped hiding. Jake's eyes widened. What do you mean? I mean, Thomas said, we stop running. We go back. We tell everyone the truth. We put her face on the news. We make sure the world knows what she's doing, and that she wants Shadow silenced because he stopped her. But that's dangerous, Sarah said. What if she retaliates? She's already trying, Rodriguez added. But exposure is the one thing she fears. She works in shadows. Let's take that away from him. And so the plan was set in motion. The next morning, the Patterson family, along with Thomas and Shadow, returned home under full police escort. Cameras were installed everywhere. A temporary security fence went up. A patrol car was parked at the curb 24/7. More importantly, a press conference was scheduled. Detective Rodriguez stood in front of reporters on the courthouse steps and told the story, carefully, without endangering any classified information. He talked about a golden retriever named Shadow, once a member of an elite K-9 unit, who had gone missing during a high-risk operation and had only recently resurfaced. He described how this dog, thanks to the unlikely kindness of a 6-year-old boy named Jake, was now at the heart of an attempted cover-up by criminal networks desperate to keep their secrets buried. The boy showed compassion where others turned away, Rodriguez said into the microphones. And in doing so, he not only saved a life, he may have exposed an international criminal operation. The footage aired that night on every local news station and was picked up nationally the next morning. Shadow's story spread like wildfire. A mistreated dog. A brave child. A broken system finally being held accountable. People were outraged. Donations flooded in to support K-9 recovery efforts. Retired officers offered to board the Patterson home themselves. Even strangers sent letters, some with their own stories of rescue and healing. And then came the unexpected breakthrough. 3 days after the press conference, an envelope arrived. No return address. Inside, a single flash drive and a note. He remembered. I couldn't do it. Use this. Detective Rodriguez plugged it in. Video files. Dozens of them. Security footage from the very compound where Shadow had first alerted Thomas to the hidden room. Names. Faces. Transactions. Blueprints. Communication logs. It was everything they'd never found during the original bust. The evidence they needed to shut down Maria's operation for good. And it came from inside. Rodriguez looked up. She's losing control of her people. They're turning on her. But Maria wasn't finished yet. That night, Jake woke to the sound of Shadow growling, not a low, protective sound, but sharp, guttural, and urgent. Outside, the house was still. No headlights. No footsteps. But then Shadow lunged at the window. Sarah rushed in. What's wrong? Jake pointed out the window. There's a red light. They looked and saw it. A laser pointer. Moving slowly across the wall of the living room. A targeting laser. And then, pop. The power cut out. Total darkness. Sarah grabbed Jake. Get to the safe room. Thomas burst in with a flashlight and his old police sidearm. We're under attack. From the front yard, muffled movement. A whisper. Then glass shattered upstairs. Shadow barked and ran toward the sound. "No," Jake cried. "He's hurt. He can't fight." But Shadow didn't stop. He was back in full T9 mode. On the second floor, a masked man entered through the window and landed in the hallway. He held a dart gun and a tranquilizer pouch. He didn't get far. Shadow hit him like a rocket. The two tumbled down the stairs in a blur of teeth and limbs. The man tried to aim but couldn't. The dog was too fast, too powerful. Outside, sirens again. Officers flooded in. The attacker was apprehended, bleeding and dazed, stunned that a dog could fight like that after so much trauma. But he wasn't the only one who'd broken in. Another attacker had slipped through the backyard. And Jake, sheltering in the safe room, heard him breathing just outside the door. "Give him to me," the voice whispered. "I'll make it fast." Jake held his breath. "Shadow," he screamed. The door slammed open. And Shadow was there. Bloodied. Bruised. But unstoppable. He knocked the man backward, pinning him against the floor until the police arrived. By morning, the attackers were in custody. The Patterson house was a mess: broken glass, overturned furniture, blood on the floor. But Jake and Shadow? They were alive. Sarah held her son close. "I can't believe he saves you again." Jake looked at Shadow, his eyes wide with wonder. "I can." The final blow came a week later. Thanks to the files from the envelope and testimonies from the captured men, the FBI issued an international warrant for Maria. Interpol got involved. And within 48 hours, she was captured at an airfield trying to board a private plane under a fake passport. Her arrest made headlines. But back in Willowbrook, the celebration was quiet. Jake and Shadow were resting on the porch, the golden retriever's head in the boy's lap, just as it had been that first day under the oak tree. "We did it," Jake whispered. Shadow didn't move. But his tail thumped twice. That was enough. The sun rose gently over Willowbrook, casting a soft golden light through the leaves of the now famous oak tree in the park, the very spot where Jake had first seen Shadow. It had been nearly 2 months since Maria's arrest. The town had changed. People smiled more. Strangers patted Shadow on the head when they saw him at the farmer's market. The same neighbors who had once turned away in fear or disgust now stopped to thank Jake and his family. Shadow was no longer that stray or that dangerous dog. He was a hero. A small ceremony was held at the town square, not to mark a holiday or election, but to honor kindness, the kind that comes from a child's heart and a dog's loyalty. Thomas stood at the podium, the sun glinting off the polished badge pinned to his jacket. "Today," he began, voice thick with emotion, "we celebrate a partnership that reminded us what courage really looks like, a boy who saw value in what others overlooked, and a dog who never forgot how to protect the people he loves." He gestured toward Jake and Shadow sitting side by side on a small stage. "Please welcome Willowbrook's first ever junior K-9 officer and his partner." The crowd erupted in cheers. Jake stood nervously, dressed in a miniature version of the local police uniform. Shadow sat beside him, his collar now bearing a custom medallion etched with the town seal and the words, "Honor through loyalty." Jake spoke into the microphone, his voice clear and sweet. "Shadow taught me that even when you're hurt or scared or don't know where you belong, there's still a place for you if someone believes in you. I believed in him. And now he's my best friend. My protector. My family." Tears rolled down more than a few cheeks that day. Over the next few weeks, Shadow and Jake began their new routine as community ambassadors. They visited schools and libraries, teaching kids about kindness, safety, and how to care for animals. One rainy Tuesday, a teacher at Willowbrook Elementary sent Sarah a video. It showed Shadow lying in the reading circle, surrounded by children who were each reading aloud, some confidently, sung haltingly, but all with excitement. Shadow lay calmly in the middle, his head occasionally turning toward each child, his tail wagging softly whenever they said his name. "He listens," one little girl whispered into the camera. "He really listens." Back at home, Sarah had framed the message carved into the wooden beam of the treehouse, the one Jake had written the day after they returned from hiding. "This is our fort. No bad people allowed. Shadow is king." It still made her laugh. But it also reminded her how far they had come, from hiding, from fear, from trauma, to something stronger. Something like joy. A few weeks later, a letter arrived in the mail. Handwritten. No return address. "Dear Jake and Shadow, I saw your story on the news. I used to be scared of dogs. One bit me when I was little, and I thought all dogs were bad. But after seeing what Shadow did, I'm not scared anymore. I asked my parents, and now we're adopting a dog from the shelter. His name is Rusty. He's missing part of his ear, but I think that just makes him cooler. Thank you for helping me not be scared anymore. Love, Emily, age 9. Jake carried that letter in his backpack every day after that. That fall, the town unveiled a new bronze plaque at the base of the old oak tree. It read, "In memory of all the lost souls who found their way home through love. Dedicated to Junior Officer Jake Patterson and K-9 Shadow, who taught us that every ending can become a new beginning." Shadow sat proudly beneath it, tail sweeping the grass, ears pricked as if he knew. Maybe he did. One night, as leaves drifted lazily across the sidewalk and the world outside grew quiet, Jake lay in bed with Shadow at his feet. The golden retriever's breathing was slow, steady, and peaceful. Jake whispered, "You're not just a hero. You're my miracle." He reached out and rested his hand on the dog's chest. Shadow opened one eye, gave a soft chuff, then settled back down. And in the soft silence of that moment, it didn't matter what came next, what dangers had been faced, what memories still lingered. Because Jake knew, with absolute certainty, that they would face anything together. And no matter what, Shadow would always find his way back home.